Imagine walking through a heavy oak door, into a world of flickering flames, the smell of roasting meat, and the murmur of strangers plotting in dark corners. This is not a fantasy novel. This is not a scene from a blockbuster film. This is history, raw, unfiltered, and far more dangerous than any fiction ever written. For centuries, these places held the secrets of empires, witnessed murders over dice games, and served as the beating heart of medieval society. Tonight, we step inside the taverns, inns, and alehouses that shaped the course of Western civilization, and discover the shocking truths they tried to keep hidden. In medieval England, life was brutal, short, and unpredictable. Disease lurked in every shadow. Travel between cities meant risking everything: your money, your safety, your very life. Yet people moved constantly. Merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, and wanderers seeking fortune or fleeing fate. And when darkness fell, when the roads became too dangerous to traverse, there was only one sanctuary. One place where a stranger could find food, drink, and perhaps a bed that wouldn't kill them. These establishments weren't luxuries, they were survival itself. But not all drinking houses were created equal. Medieval England operated on a strict hierarchy of hospitality, and understanding it could mean the difference between a good night's rest and waking up without your purse. Or worse. At the summit stood the inns. Respectable, regulated, positioned near town gates or spaced roughly 20 miles apart along major roads. Below them, the taverns. Originally wine houses run by vintners who imported their product from across the sea. And at the very bottom, the alehouses. Private homes where women sold whatever ale their families couldn't drink themselves. 3 tiers, 3 experiences. One dangerous world. The innkeepers of medieval England were among the most important figures in their communities, yet history has largely forgotten them. When Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales between 1387 and 1400, he immortalized one such establishment, the Tabard Inn in Southwark. This wasn't fiction. This was a real place, with a real owner who served real travelers preparing for their pilgrimage to Canterbury. Chaucer describes a host who served victuals of the best kind and wine so strong that his guests were well pleased to drink. But behind this welcoming facade lay a complex business operation, one that required managing dozens of strangers under one roof, many of whom had never met before. Here is a truth that modern travelers would find horrifying. When you rented a room at a medieval inn, you weren't getting privacy. 10, sometimes 12 complete strangers would be packed into a single sleeping chamber. If there was a bed, and that was not guaranteed, you shared it with whoever else had paid for the privilege. Imagine lying down beside people you had never met, people whose intentions you could not know. In complete darkness, theft was rampant, disease spread like wildfire, and violence was always one wrong look away. This was not the Holiday Inn. This was survival at its most primitive. In the taverns, wine flowed freely, but so did deception. Most wine in England was imported, making it expensive and highly profitable. The most common variety came from Gascony in France, costing about 3 pennies per gallon, twice the price of the finest ale. Rhenish wine from the Rhine region could cost 6 to 8 pennies per gallon, a small fortune for common folk. With such profits at stake, the temptation to cheat was overwhelming. Some tavern keepers would water down their wine. Others would sell cheap wine at premium prices. But the consequences of getting caught were severe and public. Cheating tavern keepers were locked in the pillory, while their own counterfeit wine was poured over their heads as crowds watched and jeered. Their guild membership revoked, their reputation destroyed, their livelihood gone. The alehouses of medieval England were built on the backs of women, the alewives who brewed, sold, and sustained their communities. When a batch of ale was ready for sale, these women would place a stake or broom outside their door, a simple signal that transformed their homes into temporary drinking establishments. But here's what made their work so urgent. Ale before the introduction of hops would only last 1, maybe 2, perhaps 3 days before spoiling. Whatever the family couldn't consume had to be sold immediately or wasted entirely. These women weren't just supplementing household income, they were providing calories, actual nutrition, to a population that depended on ale as a dietary staple. The alewife wasn't just a merchant, she was essential to survival itself. In 1266, the English crown made a decision that would shape the food and drink industry for centuries. The assize of bread and ale tied the price of these staples directly to the price of wheat. No longer could brewers and bakers charge whatever they wanted. Prices were now controlled, regulated, enforced. A new profession emerged, the ale conners. These officials were sworn to examine and test ale throughout their jurisdictions, ensuring quality and fair pricing. Those who repeatedly violated the law faced terrifying punishments. For female brewers, this meant the trebuchet, not the siege weapon that launched boulders, but a smaller device designed for one purpose: public dunking in the river, humiliation as entertainment, justice served cold and wet. The medieval coroner's rolls tell stories that feel almost too tragic to be real. In 1276, a man named Osbert le Whale left a tavern in Bedfordshire. He was, according to official records, drunk and disgustingly overfed. As he approached his house around midnight, he suffered what was called the falling sickness and struck his head on a stone. The impact shattered his skull. He died from what the coroner coldly recorded as misadventure. But Osbert was not alone. The records are filled with such deaths. Men who drank too much, wandered into darkness and never saw morning. The tavern gave them comfort. The night took everything else. Some deaths were no accident at all. In 1272, a man named Ralph left a tavern owned by Robert Malone. He had been drinking heavily. 4 men waited in the darkness: Robert Bernard, Robert of Shefford, Richard Norman. Roger Brienne. They asked Ralph a simple question: "Are you drunk?" When Ralph, confused and vulnerable, asked who they were, one of them answered with a sparth axe to the skull. The coroner recorded that blood and brains immediately flowed out. Ralph lost his speech instantly. He died the following midday. The taverns of medieval England were not merely places of merriment. They were hunting grounds for predators who knew exactly where to find their prey. The church preached temperance and virtue, but its servants often practiced something else entirely. A letter from around the year 1200 reveals the frustration of religious authorities with their own clergy. "We have been given to understand that chaplains in your deanery live in less than upright fashion. They go to taverns where they have inappropriate and illicit association with lay people." The writer's complaint was damning. People were saying priests were no different from lay people. The hypocrisy was profound. Those who preached against sin were committing it regularly in the very establishments they condemned. And the gambling that took place in these taverns didn't just damage reputations. One letter describes a man who gambled away everything, right down to his drawers. Faith, fortune, and dignity, all lost at the roll of the dice. Consider this staggering fact. In the year 1309, London contained 354 taverns. The city's entire population was only 80,000 people. That means there was one tavern for every 225 men, women, and children. This was not simply about drinking. This was about community, commerce, and connection in a world without telephones, newspapers, or social media. The tavern was where news traveled, where deals were struck, where strangers became allies or enemies. Every major city in medieval Europe was built in part on the foundations of its drinking houses. They were the original social networks, analog and dangerous, but absolutely essential. But taverns offered more than just drink. Many establishments kept what was called a perpetual stew or hunter's pot going at all times. A cauldron that was never emptied, only replenished. Customers would receive a bowl, and whatever they took would be replaced with fresh ingredients. Incredibly, this practice continues today. A restaurant in Japan has served the same broth continuously since 1945. In Perpignan, France, one establishment maintained the same stew from the 15th century until World War II. Among the most popular dishes was bocconade, a rich stew of beef or goat with parsley, sage, saffron, and egg yolks. The recipe appears in cooking manuscripts across England and France for centuries. Simple ingredients transformed by hours of slow cooking into something that could warm a weary traveler's soul. Some of these establishments have survived the centuries. The Porch House in Stow-on-the-Wold claims origins dating to 947, making it potentially over 1,000 years old. Of course, such claims are complicated. A single ancient stone does not make an ancient building. Continuous use does not mean continuous identity. But something remains, something tangible. When you walk through the door of an ancient inn, you walk the same path as pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, and scoundrels who came before. You stand where murders were plotted, where fortunes were won and lost, where strangers shared beds and secrets and sometimes their final moments. History is not locked behind glass in museums. Sometimes it serves drinks. The medieval tavern was never just about alcohol, it was about humanity. Our need to gather, to share stories, to find warmth in a cold and hostile world. The establishments we visit today, the bars, the restaurants, the coffee shops, they are the direct descendants of those ancient alehouses, taverns and inns. The names have changed, the drinks have evolved, but the fundamental purpose remains exactly the same. We gather, we drink, we eat, we connect with strangers who might become friends, not enemies. The medieval tavern was a mirror reflecting everything that makes us human. Our hospitality and our violence, our generosity and our greed, our longing for community and our capacity for cruelty. And perhaps, if we look closely enough, we might recognize ourselves staring back.